welcome to the RECO12 speaker meeting. My name is Justin, and I am an addict. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Welcome once again to the RECO12 speaker meeting. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust and sex, food and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the similarities of addiction and to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom meeting each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of the speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. In order to ask questions, if you're here live, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you are hearing this podcast recorded and would like to participate in the future as a live audience member or even as a guest speaker, please go to www.RECO12.com, and that's the number 12, to learn more and submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations or to submit to become a guest speaker. RECO12 is an ad-free service, and we appreciate your help in keeping it that way. We gratefully accept contributions to help cover the cost of the Zoom platform, podcast platform, web hosting, and administrative costs. The guest speaker also chooses a fellowship or recovery-centered organization to which the majority of contributions from that week's meetings will be donated to. To contribute, you can go to RECO12.com/support, or you can click on the PayPal link that will be in the chat of the live meeting. Or if you use Venmo, you can also contribute there. Our handle is at RECO-spelled out 12, TWELVE. When you contribute, please specify the meeting number. This is meeting number 3. And John has kindly chosen to have all contributions from this meeting go to RECO12, and we're grateful for that. Thanks, John. Last week's meeting with Cameron F. Went very well. If you missed hearing that one or any other meeting we've done, you can listen to them in podcast form by searching for RECO12 Speaker Meeting Podcast on virtually any podcast platform that you use. Or you can go to the RECO12 website and find it under the link podcast. Now let's introduce our guest speaker for today, John G. John is a 73-year-old alcohol, heroin, methadone, and cocaine addict. He got clean in NA in 1992. He lived at a 12-step community for approximately 7 years. John has been attending AA for the past 6 years. Always has had a service commitment in whichever current home group he's in. This last year, he had a coffee commitment for 6 months and has done service at the intergroup level and with H&I, which stands for hospitals and institutions. And that's a way that one can give back to the addict who suffers in hospitals and institutions. John has always worked with a sponsor and has gone through the steps of recovery several times. He sponsors men quickly through the steps as outlined in the AA Big Book. John is also friends with 14 cloistered nuns who reside in a monastery. So John, right now, I'm going to have you take it away. I'll unmute you and you can take it away from here. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much, Justin. So hello, everyone that's also on the meeting. I'll just start at the beginning, which is that I was born in London, England, and came here when I was 14. I lived in Ireland. I was raised by my grandmother until maybe I was 3 or 4 years old, until she died. And at that time, I was sent back to my mother in England, in London. And my mother told me that the first day of school, the teacher called her to tell her that I had been fighting with the other students. And what characterized my early childhood and into teenage years was, a defiance and I know better. And in school, I was the class clown. I was a truant from school. And I was always attracted to to excitement and to people that were basically looking to do the same thing I was doing, which was not to listen to their parents or, try and do well in school. The other thing I remember distinctly is, for some reason, I guess I was going to church on my own on a Sunday, and my father would ask me what vestment color the priest had on. And I would guess. If I guessed right, I was okay. If I guessed wrong, I was disciplined pretty harshly. So I had that going on. I had also gotten in trouble as a child and been brought in front of the courts. And I came to this country, to New York as a 14-year-old. I lived in the Bronx, and the last time I spoke at a meeting, I said I started drinking at 14. It may not have been 14. It may have been 15. I'm not quite sure. But as a 15-year-old, I did drink one time where I lost control. I couldn't control the amount that I took at that particular day, and it was wine. It was horrible. I think at that time wine was like 50 cents a bottle. This wasn't wine that you would drink at dinner. It was what you would probably call rot gut wine. And I did get high, and I got more than high. I got drunk, and my mother saw that I was drunk too, and made comments about that. And so, as I always did, yeah, and of course wouldn't listen. And the other thing was I didn't adjust well when I got here. I became very introverted. I was, I stayed in my house for one whole summer. I just couldn't, London was entirely, even though it's a big city, it was entirely different from New York. And so I didn't adjust well at all. And so after that drinking experience, I know I drank again after that without much, consequences. And when I was 16, I started working in Manhattan, and there was guys there in the place I worked, which was a supermarket that, lived in the surrounding area, and it was actually an area on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, just below Harlem. It was like at that time it was a German-Irish neighborhood. I started hanging out with those fellows. They were much on the same path I was, which was, I don't think, I actually graduated from high school. I don't know how I did that, but they had already dropped out of high school, and we were hanging out. And the big thing was to go and drink in the park. So we actually had a bar that the guy would let us come in and drink. He must have lost part of his license because he couldn't sell. He could only sell beer. And from that time on, I remember that I drank for effect. I drank, for the way I would feel if once I got high. It provided ease and comfort, like everything was okay. And because everything was okay when I drank, I continued to drink, basically starting down the path of addictive drinking and into alcoholism. And I started to drink first of all, it was a Friday night, then it was a Friday, Saturday night, then it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. Then I found that I could actually drink during the day, and there was people that were having problems with drink in the neighborhood. So of course I gravitated towards them. And, so the classic symptom, one of the definitions that is described in We Agnostics, if when you drink, you can't control the amount that you take, meaning the amount of drink you take or the amount of money you spend on it or the amount of time doing it, it says that you're probably an alcoholic, which only a spiritual experience will address. But I didn't know any of that. I didn't even know that I had a problem with it. I thought the problem at the time was I didn't have enough alcohol and that I didn't have enough money. So it was the progression had already started, but it was unbeknownst to me. And then I had mentioned Harlem earlier. There was some of the older fellas who were going up to Harlem, and they were starting to use heroin. And I started to use heroin. And, it was just showed how desperate and fear I was. I didn't realize it at that time, and really screwed up, that I would do that, and I started to do it intravenously right away, and quickly spiraled out of control with that, where I started to need it, or if I didn't get it, I would wake up sick. And so at that point, my life became basically, how was I going to find ways and means to get the heroin? That was the one thought on my mind all day long. And, and so there was a lot of criminal activity involved with that to support that habit. And then I tried a geographic cure for that. I went back to Ireland and just started drinking heavily over there. They may not even heard of heroin at that time. That was in 1968. And so I came back the first day. It was a snowstorm that I landed in Kennedy Airport. I went into Manhattan to buy heroin. And so all the time that I used heroin and then started using cocaine, and while I was on a methadone program to get off of the heroin, I didn't know that it was an illness, that I was sick, that with all of my own willpower, all of my own trying to manage it, all of my own self-knowledge, I wasn't going to be able to stop. And I actually thought it was a moral issue, that I just was bad and that I wasn't trying hard enough. So when I came back, I went right back to the heroin again. Then I got on a methadone program. And I was on that for many years. And the one thing it did, it allowed me to go to work because it's long lasting. The methadone, you don't quite get sick if you don't have it. Well, you do if you don't, but you can, one dose will last you the whole day. But the underlying issues were there that was causing me to use drugs in the first place. They weren't addressed at all. And around 1978, I had the great idea that I would start using cocaine with the methadone. And that's, it was like, being on the Titanic and thinking if you change seats, you would get saved. And that was my thinking somehow, that it would be better to use the cocaine along with the methadone. And, it's just very, very screwed up thinking. But that's where the disease centers. It centers in the mind. Anyway, so in order to support a cocaine habit, I saw right away I was in trouble with this substance, and it never occurred to me, John, you're in big trouble. Stop. Well, first of all, I wouldn't have been able to stop. That's the other definition that stands alone as a definition of addiction, is that when you try to stop, when you want to quit, you can't quit entirely. In other words, you swear off, and I did that many, many times, swearing off, but never being able to stay stopped. I started doing a lot of armed robberies. At one point, I was doing 3 of them a day. And I also robbed a very big, it was a daylight robbery of a very famous art auction house it was right in the middle of Manhattan. And I was eventually arrested for that. So some of the things that happened to me was I shot somebody in an armed robbery. These things I'm not proud of at all, that I did that. Actually, that was a robbery gone wrong. Another robbery gone wrong. The person put the gun to my head and pulled the trigger, and it was on safety. That's, I always feel that God knew exactly what he was doing. And another time, another robbery gone wrong, I walked away from the robbery because the person had no money, and they shot me. They didn't shoot me. They shot at me, and I felt the bullet go past my ear. I was stabbed. I was stabbed trying to buy heroin. I would go up to Harlem all the time, and I would have to watch out for people that were trying to take the drugs off me or my money, and the police, on the other hand, because they knew I wasn't, that I wasn't from up there. And when I was drinking and not really using drugs, I attacked a police officer drunk, and um, it was in a subway station, and they called the precinct, and the whole precinct came, and they beat me up and down the platform because I was resisting arrest. And about 10 months after that, I had a very serious brain injury. I was not so much an injury, I had an aneurysm that burst. And I was lucky to live through that. I had a grand mal seizure. Now I'm saying, yeah, those things, and there was other things that were more on a humorous side. When I talk about the robberies, it was like if you watch something on YouTube or in the movies, it would be like funny almost. It would be, oh my God, this guy is doing this stuff, um, and I was driven to do that by the addiction. So while I was in prison, I had a spiritual experience where I was in a program where the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous were being discussed. That's about it. We were kind of trying to argue against them. It was a program for alcohol substance abuse treatment, but it was treatment. It wasn't, you had to go there if you wanted to get parole. So that's why I was there. And there was always this argument about God. And that's the first time in my life I had thought of God. And I said, I do believe in God, just that he's out somewhere very far away and really wouldn't have nothing to do with me, that maybe one day if I started to be good, then he would have something to do with me. And, my whole conception of God was upside down. And one day I just asked the God that I really didn't believe in to lift the obsession to drink alcohol and use drugs. And I've never had it since that day, the obsession, that is. And I stopped. I was getting high in the facility I was in because drugs were coming in. I actually overdosed in one of the facilities I was in a cell, in a locked cell, and was turning blue when I was taken out of there. I had that experience. That's definitely an awakening. But I was so I had bought into the drug lifestyle, lock, stock, and barrel. And I basically, my philosophy in life was that I'm going to do you before you can do me. And, I'm in a prison also. In fact, I had a very hard time in the prison after I had that experience because I was a different person, although I didn't know it. And basically, I was not so much shunned, but wasn't, I wasn't somebody any longer to hang out with. I basically, the last 2 years I was there, I kind of did it, alone on my own, which was okay. I stayed out of trouble that way. But I didn't really understand the full extent of that experience, how profound that was. And I was basically using God as I don't know, I think maybe once a day I said a prayer in the morning, but didn't realize I could have a relationship with God. And then I was paroled, and lo and behold, I started to use drugs again. And against all odds, because I had been convicted twice of armed robbery, which is a B felony. And if I had gotten arrested the third time, the actual plea out sentence, which they call cop out to it, which you admit to it right away, would have been a 16 to life sentence. And, I knew that was hanging over my head. And yet I started to use drugs again. And basically I started to use drugs because I didn't know what else to do. I had not used for 2 years or drank. When I was paroled, everything was different. I didn't have any friends. I started laying on the couch watching television. The television started watching me at some point. And, people said, John, why didn't you, go to the movies or ask a girl out to eat or other things that people do to socialize? And I said, I wouldn't have even known how to do that. I said, I never did that. And I didn't. As a teenager, I got into this lifestyle very quickly, and nothing was going to come in between me and that lifestyle. And I was always scheming and figuring things out, how to get more money. So the other thing I just want to mention briefly in reference to things I did was the way I treated my mother. You know, I wouldn't have done that to my worst enemy, and she always stood by me, and I'm just very grateful for that. So the reason I mentioned those things is that in the first step, it says we're powerless over alcohol, or in NA, our addiction, our lives are unmanageable. All those things there were not unmanageability. It was the consequences of the life I had chosen and using drugs. This goes hand in hand with drug use. Drug use is not a normal lifestyle. It's kind of off the grid, and it's there's the thing. Those are the things I did. But again, that was consequences. That wasn't the unmanageability. The unmanageability was my inner state, my emotional state, my, chronic resentments, my chronic self-pity, my chronic fear. Fear was very big for me. And just a lot of negative emotions. In the big book, it talks about the bedevilments where, we have trouble with our emotional state. We can't keep personal relationships and some other things, categories that they list. And so that's really what was unmanageable and what I was trying to fix through alcohol. Alcohol and drugs were a solution for me initially, and then they turned on me and they became, I was the problem, and now I added more to the problem by starting to use drugs. And that type of unmanageability of where, they say we drink and use drugs because we like the way the effect it produces. And what the effect it produces is to give us relief. And I'm speaking for myself now. It gives me relief from the way I was feeling. I wasn't feeling good about myself. I was in fear all the time. So a drink or a drug would change that. All of a sudden I'd be able to relate to everything. I wasn't fearful. And I just started chasing that I was out there 30 years. So when I went into the, and the other part of the unmanageability is that because I wasn't, that was the unmanageable part. And in the third column, in the fourth step, where we take personal inventory. That's the column that deals with our self-esteem, our personal relationships, our sexual relationships, our ambitions, financial, our pocketbook. And that's what God should be managing, because I've tried to manage that and it doesn't work. It did not work. I couldn't manage it to the point where I had to use drugs. So none of that I knew. So the part of the unmanageability, I'm sorry, I keep kind of forgetting my train of thought here because I'm old, is that the unmanageability is that I couldn't manage, along with not being able to manage negative emotions where they weren't negative but positive. I couldn't manage the decision to stay stopped. I could not manage the decision to stay stopped because, 2 or 3 years in, I was in a long-term facility in Harlem, and I was trying to stop, shooting heroin. And then many times I tried to stop, I wanted to get off the methadone tour. I tried to stop shooting cocaine. I tried and tried and tried and tried over again. And what I was using was human means. I was using myself. I'm the problem. I was applying more the problem to try and find a solution. It wasn't working. And in the big book, Carl Jung, one of the foremost psychologists in the world, treated Roland Hazard for a year. And, when he left there, he went back and drank. Carl Jung was human aid. A therapist is human aid for if you have the addiction where you're beyond human aid and hopeless. where you can't control the amount you take when you start to drink, which sets off the phenomena of craving. And then when you try to stop, you can't stop. And that's why we need a higher power to come in at that moment of temptation and manage that decision to stay stopped. So I didn't find any of that out until I was years and years into recovery. But I went into a rehab in 1992, and the first step is the first step, and everything stems from that. And I had a profound first step experience, which was that sometime in the rehab, I had the thought that, John, when you leave here, it doesn't matter whether you want to drink and use drugs again or whether you want to stop and not use drugs, you're going to drink and use drugs. And that scared me. I had never had that thought before. The thought I always had was that I was going to stop, that I'll do it one more time, then I'll stop, that I would stop, that, if I got married, I would stop. If I got the right job, I would stop. And I had all that stuff too. I had a very good job at one point. I did marry at one point. If I had the house and the white picket fence and the children, that I would stop. And I realized that if all of that came, it didn't matter what came my way, that I wouldn't be able to stop. I wouldn't be able to stop. So I went right into NA off of that, and I've been in the 12-step programs ever since for 28 years now. And it's been a journey. It's been wonderful. The longer I've been around, the more I realize that I'm powerless and that I need God, and that God is the change agent, and that I'm still powerless over alcohol and drugs. The part that I'll never be cured from, the 12 steps don't address it. Nothing will address it. Is the physical allergy. And if I take a drink, the drink will take me, and I'm off. The phenomena of craving sets in. I can't stop drinking. That I'll never be cured from. But the obsession, an obsession is a thought that trumps all other thoughts. When the obsession starts to where, oh, you can do that one more time, John, or this time it'll be different, John, or you haven't used in 28 years, John, it's not going to make a difference. You'll stop. If that thought starts, then I'm distracted from that thought. And, that's God. So, and throughout the recovery, I've realized that the spiritual awakening is that I start to think of others and not to think of myself. And if I'm doing 10 and 11 on a daily basis, which is taking an inventory of myself, praying and meditating, and then that's staying close to God. It says in the third step that God, being all powerful, will provide everything. And then it says, if you do two things. So I have two tasks. One is to stay close to him and do that through prayer, meditation, and inventory. And to do his work well is to take people through the steps and help other people. And that's it, folks. Thank you.
Awesome, John. Thank you so much. I really appreciated those, especially that close up, the two tasks you have, to stay close to God and to do his will well. Super cool stuff. So before we get into the Q&A portion here, I just want to remind everybody, hey, if you'd like to contribute, John has chosen RECO12 as the organization. You can, if you feel like it's God's nudging you to do something like that, please do so through the links here in the chat or on the RECO12.com/support. Also, if you have any questions for John, please post them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom page. I've got a question here for you, John, that I loved. One of the phrases you said that your conception of God at that time was upside down. John, can you please explain why it was upside down? Maybe an example of where your conception of God was upside down, and then how it switched to right side up.
Yeah, initially I had this thought of God, of somebody far out in the universe, and had no conception that it could be a personal God. And I think I may have mentioned it, but a robbery gone wrong. I shot somebody in the robbery, and so when I'm in prison, I ask God to lift the obsession to use. You know, he didn't reply that no, you shot somebody or you're not good enough. I had never prayed to him before or asked him of anything, and it was granted. I've never had, like I said, I walked around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, um, thinking about drugs and how I could. This is even in prison. I was using regularly in prison, and that's not a good deal. That's all I'll say on that. But so for that, and it was so in active addiction, the desire to use drugs was lifted completely, and it was a miracle. It's like a miracle that you read about in the New Testament of the Bible. And so even then, I didn't realize that. I always had this thought that if I asked God what He thought of me, He would say, "Yeah, you're like a piece of shit. All of the things you've done." But I still, that day, I was the hand of God touched me, and I was changed. I was never the same person after that. But it wasn't apparent. It wasn't apparent to me anyway. It may have been apparent to other people. So I still took God for granted. I still didn't really. I wasn't looking to build a relationship with God. I wasn't looking to pray and meditate. And I think that's a lot of us go through that. We don't come in here, taking a needle out of our arm and you start praying and meditating. I think the idea of getting a different conception of God, can evolve over time. So my conception of God today is a very loving God, a very caring God that actually wants to be with me during all activities of the day and is there, just to help me if I need help, and loves to see me doing His work, which is to help other people.
Awesome. Um, I'm sure you've run into this with people you've sponsored or spoken to who are really struggling with addiction and letting it go, who have said, I've prayed over and over and over again to have this removed, this obsession removed. And you, John, you had this experience where you asked that one time and you felt that the obsession was removed. How do you help people who have said, God doesn't answer my prayers, I try all the time? What's your take on that?
Well, God does answer all prayers. He just may not answer it when you want Him to answer it, or God is outside of space and time, and if you're asking God to lift the obsession to use drugs, and you're still thinking about using drugs, and you're still recall the get high, and you really want to do that, but you're just hoping that God will help you manage not to do it, then that's not a good place to be. The best place to be is to have the desperation of a drowning man, that you'll be willing to understand how powerless you are, and then came to believe that a power greater than yourself could restore you to sanity. So Bill Wilson had a white light experience, or there's different words for what he had in Towns Hospital, where he saw God, and other people have had that. A lot of people have the educational kind of spiritual experience, which it comes over time, and the idea is to come in and to admit powerlessness. I mean, this is what I did, and then be willing to do whatever anybody asks you to do, which I was willing. If they told me to go stand on my head in the basement of Attica, I would have done it. And so asking me to do the steps there was no big deal in doing that. And the way I did them initially was probably not the right way to do them, but I did them according to how I was shown to do them. And it's probably the only way I could have done them at that time. Is I could have only taken on that much of the program at that time. And since then, throughout the years, I've had to take more and more of the program on, not as a burden, but as a way of lightening my burden.
I like how you wrap that up there with not as a burden did I take on more of the program, but to lighten the burden. That's really powerful. John, you were from your story here, you were a pretty low bottom addict. Have you worked with people who recognize their powerlessness and unmanageability at a higher bottom? And if so, how do you relate to them and help them see that, hey, your bottom doesn't have to be as low as mine?
Yeah, throughout the history of AA for the last 80 years, people have been, the original 100 were very low bottoms. And then they found that people didn't have to hit that bottom. I always say that consequences will never stop you from drinking or using drugs. However, it can get your attention. You wake up in a prison cell, and what happens the first few days is you wake up, you don't think you're there, and then you realize you're there, and the whole, your heart drops into your stomach again. And that can be an awakening, a sort of realizing that you're in trouble. So that's the first part of this, is to realize that, and again, page 44 in the big book, We Agnostics, it gives you a self-diagnosis. People can come into the rooms. Anybody that has a desire to stop drinking or stop using drugs can come into the rooms. But you can't say that you're an alcoholic or an addict unless you meet a criteria for that. And the criteria is laid out in the We Agnostics, which is, if when you want to, you can't stop entirely, or if when drinking, you can't control the amount you take, you are probably an alcoholic that only a spiritual experience will address, so to speak. So that's the first thing. I'll qualify people that I'm going to work with. I'll take them to that page and I'll ask them if they think that's them. If they think that they can manage it, or that they just have to avoid certain places, or they can't go around certain people, I'll tell them maybe you need to try some more of that. The first step is the foundation, and if you don't think you're hopeless and beyond human aid, that only a power greater than yourself is going to rescue you, then the program is going to be, it's going to be difficult for you. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. If I'm not willing to admit my powerlessness, if I'm not willing to say, you know what, I have exhausted everything that I know how to do, and it still isn't working, there has to be something. If I'm going to be rescued or recovered, it has to be from a power greater than myself. I love that concept, and it's one that sometimes it's hard for someone to admit to when they're first either brought to the fact that they're in big trouble with addiction, or even if it's been a while since they've been trying to do things and still trying to do it on their own. Hey, John, I want to take you back. I'm really curious about this, and this may or may not be painful or hard to do, but I want to take you back to one of those armed robberies gone wrong. And then I want to do a compare and contrast to maybe today. So one of them that went wrong, you said that there was a gun held to your head. the trigger was pulled, but it was on safety, so nothing happened. What was going through your head at that time? What kind of regrets or thoughts were you having at that time? You mind sharing that? And then I have a follow-up for that when you get done sharing that.
Um, you know, any armed robbery I did, I never did it when I wasn't, out of my mind and completely, high and medicated. And that particular armed robbery, I was trying to take off a methadone program, believe it or not. I've actually never heard anybody tell me that they tried to rob a methadone program except me. I mean, this is how crazy I was. And I have to be honest with you, when I was running for the door, reaching for the door, where I heard the click of the gun, and I was just relieved when I got out. I mean, I don't even think I was relieved that the gun was on safety. I was mad that I didn't get the methadone, because I wanted to get the methadone to sell it, to buy more cocaine. So, yeah, the idea of trying to be insightful about something like that on a basis of recovery is that you can't, because you were completely out of your mind, and you're not thinking in any kind of spiritual or rational manner. The other thing I wanted to say, Justin, because I didn't mention it in my story, is that the root of the problem is not the drugs. The drugs are the solution to the problem. The root of the problem is selfishness, self-centeredness, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-pity, and self-seeking. And that then becomes depression, anxiety, fear, irritability, restlessness, discontent. And that's why we keep drinking, or I keep drinking and keep using, is to get away from that irritability, restlessness, and discontent. I was discontented with my life, my whole life.
And I'm going to jump away from that follow-up question there, because I want to dig here a little bit for a second, John. When, even after you had your spiritual experience, when the light went off, the obsession went out, and you still had a few struggles after that, but when did you, or how often do you have to go back and say, when did you stop feeling the restlessness, irritability, discontentedness, and all that stuff, and start feeling the happy, joyous, and free, and the peace in your life?
You ask hard questions, Justin. No, because the answer is not an easy one. There was a sense of release in prison that, I was walking around for a day or two and I couldn't figure out what happened. Like, what has happened here? There's something, what's going on in the prison? And then I realized what was going on is that I wasn't fiending or thinking about how to get the next fix. And so that was a great release. But then, it was a conversion experience. But the further I got away from the conversion experience, the less I thought about that, what a great thing, what a miracle that happened, how grateful I should be to God. And I was running my own life again. So I then had another great relief in the rehab when I realized that I was going to use again when I left there. And again, started to work a program that had an outline of how to have a relationship with God. The 12 steps are not about not drinking. They're about how to have a relationship with God and get you to God. So, I started to do that from day one. And, the first year in NA, I was on the pink cloud. Everything was no fear, no nothing. And then this thing set in. It was like dry rot, where over the years, I started to question what was life all about and what was my part in it, and et cetera, and et cetera. And that's when I did the steps again years later and have done them. That was when I had 20 years sober. I had a great resentment against somebody. I did the fourth step out of the big book as it's specifically laid out. And in every resentment, they say, look at your side of the street. What part did you have in it? or they don't really say, I think they say, what's your mistakes in that? So I did that, and then, got relief from the tremendous resentment and also other resentments. I realized that anytime I resent somebody, I basically want to get my own way. And there's dishonesty in there, there's self-seeking in there, and there's also, it's being driven by fear. I'm trying to run my own life again. I'm not turning it over to God that He can manage those, self-esteem, personal relationships, ambition, my pocketbook. I'm starting to try and take control over that again. Yeah. So I don't know if that answered.
No, I really appreciate that. I mean, I think that's a good question. I think it's, for me, that happy, joyous, and free, and leaving behind the irritable, discontentedness, and I lost the other word. But anyways, is a one day at a time thing, just like staying sober is one day at a time, working my steps one day at a time, keeping my conscious contact with God one day at a time. I think it's that for me. But I think there are moments, like you said, where there's like this shift that happens. One thing that go ahead.
Let me just add to that, one time when I was living at that community, I was walking along on a Sunday afternoon, and I had this just this feeling of ecstasy. And it was just so much joy that, I said, wow, it was very profound. And I realized that was God. But and then when you're sick from drug use or from alcohol use, when you drink after you're very sick, you get to a place where you're okay with the world, where everything is all right, and you're kind of at peace with everything. And that's what being happy, joyous, and free is. It's being just at peace with everything, and the world is okay. There's nothing wrong with the world. There's something wrong with you, how you relate to the world, and that you need God constantly. It says in the big book, throughout the day, say, thy will be done, not mine. Thy will be done, not mine. Thy will be done, not mine.
Yeah. I've got one more question here, and unless another one comes in through the Q&A, we'll wrap it up after this, I think. You mentioned, and I love this, that the 12 steps is not about stopping drinking. It's not about stopping whatever my addictive behaviors or substances are. It's about getting right and connected with God. Was that a fairly natural realization for you, or was that something that took some time and somebody kind of jarred it into you at some point?
No, anything that I'm speaking about today, I learned. I've never had an original thought related to the 12 steps or the program. And the cleanup steps, it's like there's a slogan. I think it's trust God, clean house, and help others, and that's like a wrap of the program. So the cleanup steps, where you take your personal inventory, and the fourth step, it says courageously, and then you share it with another human being. They say God is present in that step, right? And then you become willing to ask God to remove any defects of character. And then in the seventh step, you pray for that. And then in the eighth step, you list all the people you've ever harmed in your life. And in the ninth step, you become willing to make amends to them. And then, and 10 and 11, the 10th step is basically the fourth through the ninth step. And the 11th step, prayer and meditation. And then the 12th step, doing God's work. Well, that brings you closer to God. All of that lets you have a channel to God, to where, you'll get like not even hints, but you'll understand that God is running your life when you let Him. And when you don't let Him, you're in this place of unease.
Awesome. John, do you have any closing statement here before we do our closer and wrap this up?
Not really. No, I just to thank you for asking me to do this, and if I reach one person out there, I'm happy about that. I don't know if anybody was listening, they wanted to get in contact with me to go through the steps. I could give you that information. You could pass it on if you want.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah. So send me that information in an email, and when people reach out to me and ask if they're if they could get in contact with you, I'd be happy to share that information with them. Awesome. Thank you again, John. That was a great speaker meeting, and I really appreciate your point of view. I think it will be helpful for other alcoholics, drug addicts like yourself, and others who suffer and deal with other addictions also, and want to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. Let's see. I invite the audience to come back again next week. Next week we have another awesome speaker. It's going to be Wendy F., who's a sexaholic, and she's going to be speaking on a topic. It's called her topic is "We Were Home." And I think it's going to be really powerful. I've listened to her speak before, and she's a great speaker. If you've not yet gone to RECO12.com and submitted your email address, you only need to do that once. Please get on the new invitation list so you can join us live each Friday at noon Central Time. Now, John asked if we could close up this meeting with the Lord's Prayer, and I'm so happy to do that. So if you'd like to join me in Our Father to launch us off into the rest of the day, please do so now. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. All right, everybody. Keep coming back. It works if you work it, so work it. You are worth it. Thanks again, John. Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic day.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still